Hello guys, welcome back to our anime moment. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of Renegade Immortal episode number 146 based on novel. So let's start. There were some marks on the ground where the chairs and table used to be. These marks were created because the small spell that prevented dust from gathering was destroyed along with the seals in here. After carefully observing the entire loft, Wang Lin found a lot of information. First of all, 3 people had entered this loft before him. Of course, there was always a chance that someone else had entered only to find the remains of restrictions like he did. Among the 3 people, the first person to appear was the person who used the 18 plum blossom restrictions. That person must have been very arrogant and ordinary things didn't interest him. From Wang Lin's observation, everywhere that looked like valuables were placed had signs of the 18 plum blossom restrictions. After this person left, 2 more people came, and their methods were much less professional. The tables and chairs were taken by one of them. This deduction mainly came from the marks Wang Lin saw on the ground. There were some fine bits of sawdust on these grey marks, and if you didn't look carefully, you wouldn't notice them. Wang Lin squatted down, pinched the sawdust, and took a closer look. Breaking the restriction by force caused some damage to the table and chairs here. Wang Lin flicked the sawdust away and left the loft. There was a long corridor behind the loft with a celestial jade fence on the side, and on the other side of it was a dried-up pond. There were also a lot of remnants of restrictions that had been broken. In the pond, Wang Lin once more found the pattern of the 18 plum blossom restriction. Wang Lin carefully observed his surroundings as he walked through the corridor. Many of the fences around him showed signs of being broken. The deeper he went, the fewer restriction remnants he saw, and after walking 5 kilometers, he saw the end of the corridor. At the end of the corridor, it divided into 3 different paths. Wang Lin stopped at the intersection and carefully looked at the 3 paths. He needed to find which way the person who knew the 18 plum blossom restriction went. That person's restriction was too powerful, so if Wang Lin followed that person's trail, he wouldn't be able to find any treasure. That person was like a famous thief that picked up all the good things, while the later 2 were like robbers that took everything they could. However, their abilities were limited, so some good treasures would be left behind. After carefully looking at the 3 directions, Wang Lin walked a few dozen feet down each path before returning to the intersection. His eyes lit up and he charged down the right path. Although the scenery still looked the same after 1,000 feet, Wang Lin saw broken restrictions everywhere. These restrictions were all broken by force, and there were even some that were only broken halfway, meaning that that person gave up. Every time he encountered a half-broken restriction, he would stop and carefully observe it. He wasn't in a rush to break them and would move on after observing them. The path to the right continued to extend, and there was also a fence on the side. However, it was no longer a pond on the other side of the fence but a bamboo grove. As he carefully moved forward, Wang Lin suddenly stopped. The right foot he had lifted up slowly returned to its original position. He remained motionless, but there were flashes of restrictions in his eyes. There was a pavilion about 100 feet before him. In the pavilion there was a round table and 4 stools. There was also a jug with a few cups on the table. Wang Lin's eyes narrowed, and he revealed a look of caution and looked around vigilantly. The restrictions around the pavilion were intact without any sign of broken restrictions. There must be something about that wine jug on the table. I followed the last person who broke through by force until here, but it seems he was stopped by the restrictions here. Wang Lin pondered a bit and then took a few steps back. Restrictions flashed through his eyes as he carefully observed, and gradually, his expression became more serious. So that's how it is. The restriction inside the pavilion has tens of thousands of different variations. If I can't figure it out, then once I go within 100 feet of it, I will activate. If someone tried to break through by force with the tens of thousands of changes, it would be hard to retreat unless their cultivation was heaven-defying. In addition, the most important part is that the restriction at the pavilion is the center of all the surrounding restrictions and can activate everything around it. That is why the person who came before decided to give up on this. Although the restriction is powerful, if the person who could use the 18 plum blossom restriction came here, he would only need to waste some time to break through it. It looks like I chose the right direction. No one has gone past this point yet. Wang Lin took a deep breath and revealed a hint of excitement. After he came here, all he saw was the remains of restrictions broken by others. It was as if you had entered a mountain filled with treasure only to find that the treasure was already cleaned out by someone else long ago. The way he saw it right now, this pavilion was a treasure-filled mountain. After suppressing the excitement in his heart, Wang Lin once more began observing the pavilion. He decided to simply sit down in the lotus position and began to study. The restrictions around the pavilion were like a dense series of webs. A normal person would see nothing, but a restriction master would see things very differently. It all depends on their experience with restrictions. If he wanted to break the restriction here, the first step was to observe. Wang Lin sat for 3 days, and in these 3 days, bloodlines appeared in his eyes and he began to show signs of fatigue. I can only see about 3,000 changes. I still have a ways to go before breaking the formation. However, the current restriction is inactive, so a lot of the changes can't be seen. As Wang Lin pondered, he suddenly raised his hand. A ray of celestial spiritual energy gathered on his finger and was flicked toward the pavilion. After flicking his finger, he didn't hesitate to quickly back up. He moved so fast that an afterimage was almost created. The moment the ray of celestial spiritual energy got within 100 feet of the pavilion, it immediately collapsed and dissipated into shiny specks of light. It was like throwing a drop of water into hot oil, as an explosion appeared within the 100 feet area. Once waves began to ripple, a crazy and oppressive force came from the 100 feet area. Then the powerful force surged out and immediately expanded like crazy. If Wang Lin hadn't already been prepared and was extremely fast, he would have already been swallowed by this wave. Wang Lin only stopped after he was more than 1,000 feet away. Although he was retreating, his gaze was still locked to the pavilion, and right now his eyes lit up. There was no less than 10,000 changes in that restriction. Wang Lin silently sat down and continued to calculate. Time slowly ticked away, and in the blink of an eye, 1 month passed. During this month, Wang Lin tried several times to use celestial spiritual energy to activate the restriction to study it. He had a great harvest each time and slowly gained some knowledge on the majority of the changes that occurred inside the pavilion. At the same time, during this 1 month, he never stopped his deductions. Right now his eyes were completely red and were about to leak out blood. During this 1 month, Wang Lin forgot everything. He had even forgotten he was inside someone else's cave. Right now the only thing in his mind was breaking this restriction. The more he studied and the more he deducted, the bigger Wang Lin felt his harvest was. This restriction contained tens of thousands of changes, and as he studied it, his understanding of them deepened. Wang Lin learned about restrictions inside the land of ancient God, and the type of restrictions he learned were ancient restrictions. Then he found a cave on planet Suzaku and accidentally ran into a lot of books. Add on a few hundred years of using them and fusing them, his understanding of restrictions was very broad. His mastery increased by learning more restrictions, and once he finished the 999 restriction flag, his mastery in restrictions reached a bottleneck. Anyone who studies restrictions will encounter many bottlenecks in their lifetime, and if they can't break through, their study ends there. This bottleneck was invisible and was caused by many different factors. Wang Lin gained a lot during this month of research. His restriction skills increased greatly. The various changes in the restriction allowed him to unknowingly break past the bottleneck and walk down the grand road ahead of him. At this moment, he had a 40% chance of breaking this restriction. Although it was only 40%, it has to be said that people could study this restriction for thousands of years and only have 10 or 20% chance of breaking it. Only those old monsters that have lived for them tens of thousands of years with a lot of experience and knowledge would dare to say they had 40% chance of breaking it. If the person who controlled the 18 plum blossom restriction were to come, I'm afraid he would have more than 70% chance. Wang Lin pondered. He didn't move but continued to deduce. Another month passed. Although he hadn't mastered all the changes in the restriction, he was 50% confident he could break it. On this day, he stood up with a serious expression. Although his eyes were bloodshot, he was in good spirits. He immediately arrived 100 feet from the pavilion, and after calculating for a bit, he took a step forward. Wang Lin wasn't nervous at all for this first step. He was confident that this first step wouldn't cause anything to happen and wouldn't activate the restriction. After taking one step, there was no change in his surroundings. His expression was neutral as he took another step forward, which was immediately followed by another step. 3 steps was 10 feet, and he directly took 9 steps. He was extremely relaxed the whole time, like he was walking through his garden. Right now nothing abnormal happened. He stopped after 9 steps and restrictions flashed in his eyes. He then looked at the pavilion 70 feet away from him. He pinched his fingers together as he calculated a bit and then silently walked forward. This time he moved another 9 steps. He had already walked 60 feet. The distance of 60 feet wasn't long, but it took Wang Lin 2 months to calculate a safe path through these 60 feet. This was something not even those 10,000-year-old monsters could easily get past. After 60 feet, Wang Lin's eyes narrowed. He didn't continue forward but took 3 steps back. Then he stepped to the side for 9 steps, took another 3 steps back, and then went straight ahead once more. He went in almost a small circle before arriving 30 feet away from the pavilion. His expression was calm because all of this was within his deductions and all 10,000 changes were memorized in his heart. Every single step was something he had calculated countless times until he was finally sure. He could only walk so leisurely because he was very confident. Wang Lin knew that if he wasn't careful and took one wrong step, he would suffer powerful backlash. The first 60 feet weren't that bad, but the last 40 feet would be disastrous for him with his current cultivation. However, nothing was absolute and there was always a path to safety within the restriction. If one could step onto that path in a moment of crisis, they would save their life. This was also something special about celestial restrictions. However, this path of safety was never set and was constantly moving within the restriction. During the past 2 months, aside from learning the changes of the restriction itself, Wang Lin also focused on deducing the position of the safe path. The reason he went in a circle from 60 to 70 feet was because of the change in the path of safety. He always kept himself only 1 step away from it. At this moment, he stood at 70 feet and concentrated on calculating for a moment. Then his body moved and he directly crossed 10 feet in 1 step. After landing, Wang Lin immediately crossed another 10 feet, but at the moment he landed, his expression changed. Without any hesitation, he took half a step to the left, and at this moment, a black tornado suddenly appeared in the last 10 feet. This tornado appeared out of nowhere and released a violent force. There were also strands of black lightning moving within it. In almost an instant, this 10-foot area was covered in a destructive force. The violent wind surged through the area and lightning struck out mercilessly. This destructive force was something not even ascendant cultivators could withstand, much less Wang Lin. Especially the lightning, it moved like dragons that could destroy anything. Wang Lin's figure continued to move inside the hurricane, covering the 10-foot area while carefully threading between the lightning bolts. Every step he took was on the path of safety, and one misstep would end with his origin soul being extinguished. The step earlier wasn't a miscalculation, but for some reason, the restriction started to operate in reverse. After 10 breaths of time, the tornado disappeared as if it had never existed, and the black lightning disappeared along with it. Wang Lin's body moved in a flash and crossed the last 10 feet, landing in the pavilion. Although he had finally crossed the last 10 feet, his forehead was covered in sweat. At the moment he stepped into the pavilion, the area 100 feet around it lit up. It was a bright light that shined on the surrounding area, causing the scenery to immediately change. When Wang Lin looked into the pavilion, it was as if the clouds were spread apart, revealing an area with a fake mountain. There was grass everywhere and a bamboo grove that connected with the bamboo grove that already existed. The change in scenery was as if one had come from death's door and entered another world. At the same time, a calm voice came from the void and landed in Wang Lin's ears. Breaking a restriction gives you the qualification to temporarily own this cave. As long as you don't die, no one else can enter. The moment this voice arrived, A ray of golden light flew in from the distance and stopped before Wang Lin. This was a crystal token. It was only the size of his finger, and it floated in the air and emitted a 7-colored light. This is the cave token. Hold this token and you can enter the cave. Wang Lin took a deep breath as he grabbed the small crystal token and looked at the pavilion. Every stone table and chair had restrictions protecting them and couldn't be casually touched. However, compared to the restriction covering the 100-foot area outside the pavilion, these restrictions were a lot weaker. Wang Lin didn't look at the table or chairs, his eyes focused on the wine jug on top of the round table. Although the restriction on the wine jug was exquisite, it was not difficult for Wang Lin to break. After deducing for a bit, his right hand pointed toward the jug and a water-like ripple appeared 3 inches from it. Wang Lin's finger pointed at the water ripple, creating a wave of ripples. At the same time, he quickly raised his finger and shot out an illusionary restriction that landed on the water ripple. At this moment, the water ripple immediately started boiling and a vortex formed at the center. The vortex spun faster and grew, creating a circular void. Wang Lin's right hand moved like lightning as he reached directly through the vortex, grabbed the jug, and took it back out in an instant. Then the water ripple disappeared and everything returned to normal. Wang Lin revealed an excited expression. The wine jug in his hand was heavy, so it was obviously not empty. He took a deep breath as he opened the lid, then a refreshing scent immediately filled the air. Wang Lin saw that at the bottom of the wine jug there were 10 drops of wine. This wine jug is quite heavy, but it only has 10 drops of wine. However, this is wine from a celestial, so it can't be normal. Wang Lin stared at the wine jug and began to struggle. Shortly after, he clenched his teeth, poured out a drop of wine, and immediately sucked it into his mouth. At the moment that drop of wine entered his body, Wang Lin's entire body suddenly turned bright red. A crazy amount of celestial spiritual energy suddenly filled his body in an instant. A tipsy feeling slowly appeared inside Wang Lin's body along with the celestial spiritual energy. The amount of celestial spiritual energy in his body increased rapidly as it moved through his meridians like a flood. Then a hot surge appeared inside his dantian and shot up through his body. At the same time, the tipsy feeling became even stronger. Wang Lin's eyes were no longer clear and became muddy. His body slowly leaned to the side, his head dropped, and he fell asleep. Time passed by, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 1 year. Wang Lin was asleep for this entire year, and all the while, sounds of snoring could be heard coming from his mouth. Ever since Wang Lin began to cultivate, he rarely slept, and this was the longest sleep he had in the past several hundred years. Although he was sleeping, the celestial spiritual energy inside his body was rapidly increasing. This speed would even shock the All-Seer if he were here to witness it. When the celestial spiritual energy in his body reached a certain point, the demon crystal in his dantian silently shattered and melted. Demonic spiritual energy suddenly filled his body, but it was immediately swallowed up by the celestial spiritual energy and became part of him. Strands of celestial spiritual energy came out from his body and diffused into the surrounding 100-foot area. During this year of him sleeping, the celestial spiritual energy in the area became extremely dense. While Wang Lin slept, his right hand held the wine jug. This day, Wang Lin slowly opened his eyes and let out a burp filled with the smell of wine. His eyes were filled with some confusion as he suspiciously looked around, but the confusion immediately disappeared and was filled with clarity. He immediately stood up and revealed a look of vigilance. Then he carefully looked around and he slowly frowned as he looked at the wine jug in his hand. He only remembered that after drinking 1 drop of wine, the celestial spiritual energy in his body increased and then he lost control and fell asleep. Thinking of celestial spiritual energy, he immediately checked inside himself. After checking, his eyes revealed unimaginable shock. How long have I been asleep for? After Wang Lin began cultivating, it was very rare for him to be this shocked. The celestial spiritual energy inside my body has already far surpassed the peak of the late stage of soul transformation. I only need to comprehend my domain more to step into the life and death trial for reaching the ascendant stage. Wang Lin looked at wine jug in his hand with disbelief. What kind of wine is this? Wang Lin cautiously put the wine jug inside his bag of holding. Still feeling worried, he took it back out, placed layers of powerful restrictions on it, and then placed it back inside his bag of holding. I must completely clear this place out. At this moment, Wang Lin's interest in this place reached its peak. After the excitement, Wang Lin felt some fear. Luckily, my domain hasn't reached ascendant level yet, or else I would have begun trying to break through to the ascendant stage while asleep. I wouldn't have been able to take out the ascendant crystal Ju Yi gave me, and if it failed, I would have died too pitifully. Wang Lin pondered, but his eyes immediately lit up. With my current cultivation, no one at the soul transformation stage is a match for me. Now I only need my domain to reach ascendant level, then I can find a secret place to reach the ascendant stage. Here is the most secretive place of all, so once my domain has a breakthrough, I'll come back here to reach the ascendant stage. Everything in this world really depends on fate. It was a lucky coincidence that I entered his place. If not, even if I had the celestial jades, it would have taken many years to reach this state. Is this what mortals call a fortuitous encounter? Wang Lin was in a good mood because after sleeping for a year, he was in excellent condition. At this moment, he looked around, ready to break the restriction around him, when he suddenly thought of something. How long did I sleep for? If I slept for decades, or even hundreds of years, then everything outside will have changed greatly. If that is truly the case, I would have been better off cultivating on my own. Wang Lin pondered a bit as he walked within the pavilion. His eyes suddenly narrowed and his gaze fell on the bamboo grove in the distance. A corner of a fence could be seen inside the bamboo grove. Although a majority of it was covered by bamboo, after carefully looking at it, Wang Lin was able to find some clues. Earlier I didn't notice, but there is another loft here. This looks like the courtyard of a mortal temple. After pondering a bit, Wang Lin didn't go check the temple. He took out the crystal token and his divine sense entered it. There were waves of light and his figure disappeared from the cave. In a burst of light, Wang Lin appeared on the platform where the stone door was. The cave spirit was gone without a trace along with the stone door. If it wasn't for the fact that there were traces of blood that Yao Shishua had coughed out on the ground, he would have suspected that there was an error in the transfer. Wang Lin held the crystal token in his hand. Aside from the chant to enter and exit the cave, there was some information in it as well. After pondering for a bit, Wang Lin's body shot out and quickly moved along the revered dragon path. He quickly moved past the 11 platforms. There was no change on these platforms, and the stone statues remained in Yao Shishua's seals. After what happened in the cave, his cultivation level had increased to the peak of the late stage of soul transformation, so his speed had increased by a lot. He moved like a bolt of lightning and only took half a month of time to return to the first platform. This platform was completely empty, but at this moment, with his current cultivation and what he learned from breaking restrictions for 2 months, he noticed the transfer array that was left by the blood ancestor. Looking at the array, Wang Lin pondered a bit and then took out 4 bags of holding that all belonged to Yao Shishue. If it was before, Wang Lin would have had some difficulty opening these bags of holding with his mid-stage soul transformation cultivation. However, Wang Lin's cultivation had reached the peak of the late stage of soul transformation and was now even a bit higher than Yao Shishue's cultivation. With a thought, his right hand swiped past the 4 bags of holding and a burst of blood-colored light came from the bags. This blood-colored light was extremely tenacious and it resisted Wang Lin's divine sense. Wang Lin let out a cold snort and the celestial spiritual energy in his body moved as well as his origin soul. With one squeeze, the blood-colored light around one of the bags immediately collapsed. Wang Lin didn't stop, he reached for another bag of holding. The blood-colored light resisted for 3 breaths of time before collapsing. Wang Lin wiped out the divine sense imprint on the 3rd bag just like the last 2. He was about to finish it all in one go and grab the last bag when his expression suddenly changed and his right hand stopped 3 inches away from the 4th bag. His eyes became very serious as he slowly withdrew his right hand and carefully looked at the bag of holding. Earlier, when he obtained the bags of holding, his cultivation level wasn't high enough, but looking at it now, he seemed to see some clues. There was a faint, purple line within the last blood-colored light. It would be very difficult to notice it if one was not careful. It could only be found with divine sense and was completely invisible to the eyes. Although this bag of holding looks very normal, when I was about to erase it, I had this terrifying feeling. I'm afraid this bag doesn't have Yao Shishua's divine sense. Could it be her father, the blood ancestor? Wang Lin pondered. According to common sense, unless the bag has your own divine sense, you can't open it without wiping the other divine sense out first. However, the blood ancestor's cultivation is heavenly and he has cultivated for a long time. He might have found a way for his Dafa to use his bag of holding without having to wipe out his divine sense. As a result, even if an outsider got this bag and were careless, they would immediately be killed by the divine sense on it. This blood ancestor sure is tricky. Wang Lin slowly withdrew his divine sense. Now that his divine sense was gone, the blood-colored light on the bag of holding immediately disappeared. Although Wang Lin hasn't seen the blood ancestor, after seeing how he had spread misinformation about the blood soul pill and the divine sense trap on the bag of holding, it was as if he had met the blood ancestor in person. While he felt great admiration for the blood ancestor, he also deeply dreaded him. After pondering for a while, Wang Lin carefully put the bag of holding away and placed his gaze on the other 3 bags. He spread out his divine sense and couldn't help but suck in a deep breath even with his strong mental fortitude. The first bag was filled with celestial jades. There were too many celestial jades to even estimate. Wang Lin roughly scanned it with his divine sense. There were at least 10 times more celestial jades than what she had given him so far. The amount of celestial jades needed to reach the ascendant stage is great, far more than the total amount needed before this point. The amount of celestial jades needed for every step after the ascendant stage must be unimaginable. If one doesn't have enough, their cultivation just stops. This before me is a large amount of easy money. Wang Lin revealed a faint smile as he put away this bag of holding and his divine sense moved to the second bag. Looking inside the bag, his eyes immediately released a hint of excitement. The second bag of holding had no less than 1,000 blood-colored jades. During the time he spent with Yao Shishue, he developed strong feelings for the blood jades and also dreaded them very much. Once a jade is broken, the blood-colored light it releases has a very powerful sealing force. Aside from sealing, this blood-colored light can also act as a powerful protection spell. According to Wang Lin's analysis, this blood-colored light should also be able to attack, but it would be impossible to use it without the correct chant and method. Wang Lin's eyes lit up as he touched the bag of holding and a blood jade appeared in his hand. He pondered a bit before squeezing the jade until it shattered. A ray of blood-colored light immediately came out from the shattered jade and floated before Wang Lin. After checking it with his divine sense, the blood-colored light dissipated, and Wang Lin thought, I don't have the method to use the sealing function, so I can only use it to protect myself. However, with Yao Shishue in my hands, I can get everything. The third bag was filled with many different things. There were even female clothing as well as some perfumes, small jewelry, and even dolls. Wang Lin directly ignored those things as his divine sense searched the area. His eyes suddenly narrowed as he found more than 10 blood soul pills. These wax pills were neatly placed together. There were dim symbols on them, but they weren't flickering. Not all of the blood soul pills were placed together. One pill was placed in the corner of the bag. This pill wasn't dim, and the symbols on it flickered slightly. Aside from the blood soul pill, there was also a compass on the side. Wang Lin's target was the compass. He touched the bag of holding and 2 items appeared in his hand. The compass and the blood soul pill that were placed in a corner. This Yao Shishua obviously couldn't have thought that she would be captured by me and have her bags taken by me, so the placement of the stuff inside the bag contained some information. There is an 80% chance that the blood soul pill placed on its own is real. As for the others, I assume they are all fake. In addition, aside from the blood jades, there are no magical treasures inside her 3 bags of holding. I assume things like magical treasures are all inside the bag with the blood ancestor's divine sense. Wang Lin looked at the blood soul pill for a while before putting it inside his bag of holding. As for the fake one Yao Shishue gave him, he took it out and placed it inside one of her bags. Then his eyes fell on the compass. This compass was completely blood red and was made from some unknown material. Holding it in his hand, he felt waves of coldness enter his body. Back then, Yao Shishue used this compass to enter this place. This compass must have some connection with the array here. Wang Lin's divine sense entered the compass and found Yao Shishue's divine sense imprint inside. Wang Lin let out a breath of relief. If this compass also had the blood ancestor's divine sense, he would have had to find a way to modify the transfer array here to leave this place. There was a transfer array to leave this place inside the cave as well. Wang Lin learned of it from the crystal token. However, the transfer array was in the northeastern corner of the cave and was fairly far from where Wang Lin was located. With all the restrictions in the way, it would be a difficult trip to get there. Otherwise, he wouldn't be in this situation. Wang Lin easily wiped out Yao Shishue's divine sense from the compass and replaced it with his own divine sense. He immediately found that there was a small formation inside the compass. The formation constantly changed as the pin on the compass moved and hasn't stopped once. This compass indeed also has a formation. The transfer array outside and the formation inside the compass must sync up, or else it will have no effect. Wang Lin's divine sense probed the inside of the compass and studied it for a bit. While he couldn't completely see through it, he was able to find some clues. He used 3 days of time to change the formation inside the compass, then he changed the transfer array on the platform, causing the transfer array to become very different from before. Although Wang Lin didn't change much about the transfer array, he did change one key point. If anyone else besides him were to enter this place, the transfer array would immediately send them back. This continuous transfer would cause space to break open and that person would be dragged into the void. Just sending them into a spatial rift doesn't mean they will die, so I must add some extras. Wang Lin pondered a bit and then began working on the transfer array. He had used 3 days to change the transfer array but used 30 days to add countless restrictions to it. Not only was he not impatient while adding the restrictions, he felt rather happy. If someone were to really come through here, they would definitely be surprised. Wang Lin's eyes lit up as his divine sense entered the compass to activate it. Then a flash of blood-colored light surrounded Wang Lin's whole body, and after a few breaths of time, the blood-colored light disappeared and so did Wang Lin. There was a burst of blood-colored light on the ancient mountain 1,000 kilometers away from the army camp, and Wang Lin appeared. The glaring sunlight entered Wang Lin's eyes. He looked at the surroundings with a feeling like he was viewing it from another world. The faint outline of ancient demon city didn't seem to change from when he left. Wang Lin took a deep breath as he turned into a ray of light and charged toward the army camp. His speed was much faster than before, so it didn't take long before he closed in on the army camp. Just at this moment, a powerful killing intent came out from the army camp and locked onto Wang Lin. This video will end here.